I'm delighted to welcome you all to the valedictory session of this two-day international conference. And it's an honor for me to introduce the chair of today's valedictory talk, Professor Amir Ali. Professor Amir Ali is a distinguished professor of political studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University. So was Agatha Harrison Memorial Visiting Fellow at St. Anthony's College, Oxford, between 2012 and 2014. Sir has written 2 books, both published by Routledge. In addition to academic writing, Sir's political commentary is regularly published in different platforms. It is indeed an honor for all of us to have such a distinguished professor as the chair of today's valedictory talk. Thank you, sir, for having kindly accepted our invitation. The speaker of today's valedictory talk is Professor Sangeeta Baggagupta. Madam, are you able to hear me? I just want to ensure that my voice is reaching, madam.
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Thank you so much. Welcome to this session, madam. Thank you for having kindly accepted our invitation to deliver the valedictory talk. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce today's speaker of the valedictory talk, Professor Sangeeta Baggagupta. And I'm delighted to share with you all that she is an adjunct professor in the Department of English at Maulana Azad National Urdu University. Madam has been professor chair since 2007 in Sweden. Her strong multidisciplinary and multi-field focus has located her work in departments of education, gender studies, rehabilitation research center, sociolinguistics, communication, and deaf studies. Madam is a visiting professor at CEDAW Paris, and she serves as an editor of Frontline Learning Research. She has edited 10 major volumes. A multilingual scholar, Professor Gupta's research addresses communication, identity, culture, and learning through socio-cultural and decolonial lenses. She founded and led the award-winning CCD group at Auburn University and the LPS milieu at the Yonge Shopping University. Recognized with the Wallenberg Future Leadership and Outstanding Professor Awards, it is indeed an honor for us to have you today with us. Madam, thank you for joining us. Now, with the permission of the chair, I request our esteemed speaker to begin her valedictory talk. The title of her talk is On the Necessity of Bringing Back Humanism into the Language Sciences, Reflections on Civilizational Consilience.
I just want to know whether you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you to Imtiaz and your team for 2 days of deep reflections from scholars invested in illuminating linguistic, literary, cultural, and intellectual exchanges. That is, different aspects of the human condition across time space. This conference was not only about civilizational consilience, it brought together thinkers who walked the talk of the term consilience itself. Thank you for offering me the space to reflect upon the reflections offered at a conference that has so much to say to the present moment that humanity is facing across the planet. It has been enriching to listen to the reflections of scholars, including some who I met at MANUU last year: Anil Hasnan, Gulfishan Habib, Panchanan Mohanty, Govind, and others. I will share some reflections that draw attention to what this thing called language is, what its relevance is for human beings, what we as scholars do, including what assumptions we bring with us when we focus on this thing we call language. My reflections are based on the online talks I have listened to yesterday and today, and on the key focus of this 2-day international conference, Civilizational Consilience, a concept I started engaging with after I saw Imtiaz's conference draft. My main argument built on the necessity of bringing back humanism into the broad academic domain of the language sciences. To do this, I would like to go back to the basics regarding the human condition and invite your attention to human meaning making. I do this through 5 overarching themes. 1, on the nature of being human. We are human and we become human in the company of other humans. It is through our interactions with other humans, through languaging or doing language together, that we become human. A baby who is hearing learns to communicate in one or more spoken, named languages of the community of hearing languages that he or she is born or adopted into. This seems like stating the obvious, but there is reason to raise this fact. A baby, irrespective of their hearing levels, learns to communicate in a signed language if they are born or adopted into a community of humans that uses a sign language. This too seems like stating the obvious, but there is reason to state this as well. Human beings, babies, children, and adults are experts at creating meaning in and through the mundane processes of doing things with other humans in the course of their everyday lives. Most of them do so without knowing what named languages they are using in the course of their engagement with other humans. It is not until a census worker or a linguist comes with a battery of questions, or they have to make decisions regarding their children's schooling, that they are required to reflect on and label their communication in terms of named languages. Mainstream thinking in the social sciences and humanities has created an amnesia regarding the fundamental entanglements of what makes us humans, of the human-human connections and the human-non-human cosmos entanglements across time spaces. Transcending the metaphorical West Eurocentric, North American-centric we and I, it is the we and us thinking that has been articulated in multiple ways that I am center staging here. This we and us stance has existed through the Ubuntu way of being. I am because you are. Through Tat Tvam Asi, you are that, or the self-cosmos entanglements. In Zen, philosopher and teacher Thich Han's interbeing, in ways and waves that mainstream scholarship has started learning to recognize. It is this we and use thinking that the term civilizational consilience reminds us of. 2, scholars work on language. There is growing evidence that it is we researchers, especially those of us who are active in the domains of the language sciences and the educational sciences, who seem to ever so often lose our bearings with regards to what this thing called language is. While substantial critique has been offered to our scholarly entrenched habits of approaching language as an inanimate object, devoid of the humans who give language meaning, these scholarly habits tend to continue working with the mythical assumptions of neutrality that allow for objectifying and creating the noun language. While this has resulted in widening the study of language through scholarly branches like social linguistics, applied linguistics, linguistic anthropology, educational linguistics, and most recently, decolonial and southern linguistics, we continue to disregard the mounting critique regarding the objectification of language itself. Thinking habits die hard. A common denominator that underlies this shift from the mainstream objectification of language, where the focus is on language as a noun, to the verb languaging, is some kind of acknowledgement that context matters. This common denominator regarding context has seen the proliferation of prefix social in the language sciences. A caveat here is that the social is often seen as an add-on to this thing called language. Language is not outside the social. It is constitutive of the social. Similarly, human beings are not outside of either the social or of language. They are the source of the social and of language. And this is a key issue in epistemic work. We seem to forget ever so often that no one, including none of us scholars, can be outside of languaging. That is the doing of language. Scholars look at the languaging of others, and the only tool we have at our disposal to do so is through language. It is this double bind that gives rise to some glaring discrepancies in how we as scholars approach this thing called science in general and this thing we call language specifically. 3, decolonizing our own thinking. Troubling universal and universalizing thinking calls for transcending both monodisciplinary and prefixed multi, inter, cross, transdisciplinary work that circulates within the hegemonic North-centric scientific tradition. Given that we all have been socialized into this hegemonic knowledge regime, multiversalizing science in general, and the language sciences in particular, calls for epistemic disobedience. This is why some frame the ongoing ways and waves of multiversalizing science in terms of undisciplinary work. Such work challenges scholars' comfort zones, foregrounding the necessity of being in discomfort. Being at this conference has been both exciting but also discomforting for me. Exciting because presentations were what I call normal languaging. Here, scholars themselves used multiple named languages and multiple named scripts as they went about talking about multiple named languages and named scripts. This rarely takes place in mainstream West Eurocentric, North American-centric conferences I am familiar with. But I was also discomforted because I have been reminded of some of my own writings from over a quarter of a century ago, where I questioned the value of ignoring the richness of the multiple languages in the nation state I call home. And where 3 European languages are taught as a third language to everyone in schools. We have made no headway in 2025 in making our so-called immigrant languages or so-called indigenous languages available to all pupils in schools in Sweden. Pupils continue to have the choice of studying either French, German, or Spanish as a third language. No one speaks these 3 languages in the spaces of Sweden outside schools. Ignoring the languages spoken outside schools like Urdu, Arabic, Turkish, Sami, Swedish Sign Language, and over 100 other languages is one face of coloniality. The end of administrative colonial rule did not end the coloniality of the naturalized, taken for granted ways in which people, institutions, nation states, and supranational organizations conduct their affairs. While concerns about compartmentalization aren't new in academia, thinkers like Agneta Pavlenko and Gurminder Brahmbra push for acknowledging and dismantling the monopoly that one scientific tradition has long enjoyed if we are to seriously engage with the numerous challenges that humanity and our planet faces. Multiversal narratives explicitly challenge the hegemonic single grand stories that are privileged through universalizing narratives about linear trajectories of knowledge increments. Such efforts come under the domains of decolonial, Southern, and indigenous epistemologies that revitalize our understandings of what we call science. The multiple explicit calls to decolonize institutions of higher education and learning, the research enterprise, the curriculum, among other processes in European and North American territories, are also reflected in the growing recognition of the importance of situated understandings regarding the many ways of being and ways of knowing. This is what I have experienced at this conference. 4. Global centric thinking and our meta language. Socialized into a universalistic framework that is marked by West Eurocentric, North American centric thinking, I invite our attention to the multiversal ways of understanding the human condition that have been erased. Transcending the genders, the dangers of the single grand narrative calls for questioning the hegemonies of both North or West centric thinking, but also South and East centric thinking. Instead, drawing on recent global centric thinking pushes everyone, everywhere, to decolonize ourselves. The term global centric thinking is a cornerstone of civilizational consilience. Both concepts invite the consideration of what happens to our collective imaginaries regarding science and regarding language when we allow ourselves the freedom to reimagine other words, and through other words, other worlds. The contemporary meta-language in the language sciences continues to reinforce boundaries and binaries whereby what is language is separated from what we put into non-language. One language is demarcated from another language. One communicative modality is kept aside from another modality. The digital is seen to be demarcated from the analog, and mythical connections continue to be imagined of one language to one territory and one people, and this despite human mobilities. These and other coloniality marked fables are part of the meta language that have been naturalized through the key heuristic of universalization. Debunking the hegemonic circulating discourses through which such mythical imaginaries are sustained, the language sciences need the engagement of scholars whose repertoires of languaging contain multiple named languages and named scripts. Scholars whose positionalities are aligned to different territories. Scholars who create dissonance and enable the light to seep in through the growing cracks in mainstream hegemonic thinking. This entire conference has seen the engagement of such scholars. They have together contributed to what the historian Sanjay Subramaniam offers through the lens of connected histories. Subramaniam and other decolonial thinkers' thinking pushes for transcending fashionable, fossilized, circulating terms in the existing meta-language. Such thinking points to the entangled primacy of epistemic existential work in tandem with sustainable solidarity work. Such thinking enables an engagement with the richness of the many ways of being with words, something that has been labeled as multilinguality, as the chaining of human meaning making, as normal languaging, irrespective of how many named languages humans deploy in the messiness of their communication, recognized in recent decolonial waves and ways of thinking. Such thinking can trouble the established binary, monodisciplinary, and multi, cross, inter, transdisciplinary, to instead embrace undisciplinary thinking. Here, a mobile gaze across scholarly domains and planetary territories enables sidestepping terminological somersaults of academic branding through neologisms like translanguaging and superdiversity, where meanings remain unchanged. The epistemic need to focus on mundane human languaging is key here and calls for addressing equity for all individuals and communities across northern and southern territories, those conceptualized as monolingual, as many are in my nation state, but also those who are marked as bi, multi, or plurilingual, the marginalized. Universalism continues to effectively erase alternative narratives regarding the nature of science and the multiple strands and trajectories of knowledges that have existed and exist beyond the confines of mainstream West Eurocentric, North American centric science. In addition to erasures, hegemonies of universalisms importantly build on their entanglement with extractive work. Thus, while knowledges of colonized and marginalized peoples and territories are erased, these knowledges continue also to be appropriated without permission or due recognition through processes of coloniality. These processes come together in mainstream science as historical amnesia of connected histories. In the thinking offered in this conference, scholars have illuminated the existing epistemic power dynamics that reveal marginalized and or erased and co-opted knowledges. As Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Sanduhira, and others have argued, decolonizing the scholarship calls for decolonizing our own scholarly thinking. Importantly, this calls for paying attention to complexities and heterogeneities in epistemic work and in disciplinary formations. Importantly, decoloniality is not an add-on to mainstream framings. Rather, in science, it is a stance and praxis. It is a way of being. Here, challenging notions of the universal truth, including universal ways of conducting science, multiversalizing thinking implies that the new vocabularies being offered transcend efforts of both academic branding and using decolonial thinking as a bandwagon. And finally, 5, a third position. The siloed lives of languages within research, including the education of languages across schools, adult and higher education, calls for aligning with the emerging importance given to the mundane nature of communication in the language sciences. This calls for researchers, professionals, policymakers, and other stakeholders who together constitute different communities of linguistic practices to transcend boundaries and binaries, and to instead engage with a third position that enables addressing equity through the lens of humanism. Herein lies the importance of a new meta-language that offers innovative ways of talking about language that is relevant for reimagining equity issues in epistemic work. Such a shift, I argue, is a key feature of civilizational consilience. I will end by posing some questions to ourselves through the lens of civilizational consilience. What is the relevance of the language research that the scholars at this conference are engaged in for addressing big and small issues that mark the status of our planet and the well-being of humans and non-humans on it? How is their work related to the diversification of the language sciences for supporting issues of equity and well-being across the human lifespan and for non-humans on the planet? What are the politics of publication and citation that these scholars are implicitly or explicitly aligned with? Who are we, the scholars invested in the language sciences, and for whom are we conducting research? What possibilities do we have to decolonize the language sciences and to decolonize ourselves, given that we have been socialized into time spaces, into hegemonic, mainstream, North-centric ways of understanding the world, the human condition, our relationship to other living and non-living entities, and our place in the universe? Thus, in what ways can we decenter the very habits of thinking, of doing, of being, given that these were the very habits that helped us become scientists of various hues and textures? How can the mainstream be troubled when we are ourselves products of the mainstream? From where can we start when coloniality is so pervasive? And at an overarching level, what is the nature of being human being in the 21st century? Both the human beings we study and the human beings we scholars are ourselves. Such queries draw attention to the gaze that language scholars, you and I, bring to our work, implicitly or explicitly. Such types of issues foreground epistemological ethics and moral concerns. It is these types of concerns that this conference has foregrounded in highly important ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your talk, for sharing your valuable thoughts today. I now request the chair of today's session, Professor Amir Ali, to share his remarks.
First of all, thank you, Professor Gupta, for a very thought-provoking.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Excuse me, sir. Because it is being, because it's being recorded. So this mic serves the purpose.
I also, in the meantime, just say that my surname is not Gupta, it is Bhagagupta. Thank you.
So let me begin by thanking you for that very thought-provoking valedictory talk. It very aptly summarizes the 2 days of very interesting, stimulating, rigorous intellectual discourse that we have experienced for the last 2 days. I just want to make 2 very quick points just to kind of sum up. I know people are tired. This is the valedictory session. But the idea of civilizational consilience, I think, in this conference has very, very successfully posited itself against the notion of civilizational conflict that Samuel Huntington's unfortunate thesis really defined in the turn of the century, the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. So I'm suggesting that civilizational consilience is something that people really need to think about. And I specifically, especially when you were speaking, Professor Bhagagupta, I thought of the French scholar Louis Massignon, who talked about how we all must learn to be alternately good guests and good hosts. Now, what better place to say that than in Hyderabad? Because this is one of the most hospitable cities in the world. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that civilizations, in terms of consilience, must be able to learn to be at home with each other, learn to be familiar with each other, which is so much against the idea of conflict that we have seen. Now, what would learning to be at home with each other mean? It would mean an acceptance. It would mean a warmth. It would mean a genuine hospitality. And I just want to end on one word, because this is a conference on the Persian sphere, the Urdu sphere. And since I arrived in Hyderabad 2 days ago, the one word that has been going through my mind, which is a Persian Urdu word, is Pazirai. What better word than to capture what we have experienced in this city? So this is, I think, the big takeaway that we have from this conference. Civilizational Consilience, I hope, can set the stage for a much, much more harmonious 21st century, in contrast to the very conflict that we've experienced. I would like to end there because I know this has been very time, but let me thank the organizers for putting in so much hard work. MANUU is a great university. It has provided a remarkable sphere for this kind of discussion to happen. I'll end there. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Professor Amirali, for your meaningful observations and kind words. Thank you, Professor Bagagupta, for your valuable talk. And I think this leads to a very humane, and humanist conclusion of our intellectual deliberations. Now I invite the director of this two-day international conference, Professor Aleem Ashraf Jaisi, sir, to address you all and declare the closure of this conference.
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया डॉक्टर समीना तबस्सुम। मैं अपने तमाम मेहमानों का समीम क़ल्ब से शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ। बुनियादी तौर पर ये कॉन्फ्रेंस कई मरहलों में इस शक्ल में जो है ज़ाहिर हुई। इब्तिदान हमको ये लगा था कि ये डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ अरबिक का एक सेमिनार है, एक प्रोग्राम है, और उसको वसात देकर उसमें अरबी से जो करीबी ज़बानें हैं उर्दू और पर्शियन को भी मिला दिया गया है। लेकिन कुछ दिनों के बाद उसकी शक्ल में मज़ीद तब्दीली पैदा हुई और ये होते होते मौजूदा शक्ल में आप तक पहुंची। और बिलाशुबहा इसको सक्सेसफुल बनाने में इसके पार्टिसिपेंट के तायीन में सबसे बड़ा रोल हमारे अजीज़ुल क़द्र और गिरामी वक़ार, मैं दोनों को साथ ही मिला रहा हूँ, अजीज़ुल क़द्र और गिरामी वक़ार प्रोफेसर सैयद इम्तियाज़ हसनैन साहब का था। दरअसल बुनियादी तौर पर हमने तो उस ख्वाब को जिसे कहें शर्मिंदे ताबीर करने के लिए अपने और अपनी टीम के साथ, डीन स्टूडेंट्स वेलफेयर की पूरी टीम के साथ, उसको जो उन्होंने बुलंद ख्याल देखे थे उसको हमने ज़मीन पर उतारने की कोशिश की है। वरना बुनियादी तौर पर सारा फिक्री सरमाया इस कॉन्फ्रेंस का वो हसनैन साहब का ही तैयार करदा था। मैं उन्हें मुबारकबाद देता हूँ इस कामयाब सेमिनार के इनेकाद पर, उनके तमाम रफ़क़ा को मुबारकबाद देता हूँ, अपने तमाम मेहमानों का शुक्रगुज़ार हूँ कि ये दो, और आप हमारी कैफियत को ये समझें कि इस कॉन्फ्रेंस के आगाज़ से सिर्फ 24 घंटे पहले हमने 10 रोज़ा आज़ाद डे सेलिब्रेशन का ख़त्मा किया था, और वो भी एक मौलाना आज़ाद नेशनल उर्दू यूनिवर्सिटी की सालाना कारकर्दगी में जो सर फहरिस्त प्रोग्राम है वो यौम आज़ाद तक़रीबात हैं, आज़ाद डे सेलिब्रेशन है, जिसमें पूरी यूनिवर्सिटी इन्वॉल्व रहती है और बहुत ही मुकस्सफ और बहुत सारे प्रोग्राम उसमें होते हैं। उस प्रोग्राम को ख़त्म करके हम एक शब्द भी आराम से सोए नहीं होंगे कि ये दूसरा सफ़र जो है जो बेहद तेज़ रफ्तार था, और इम्तियाज़ साहब का साथ देने के लिए मैं अपनी तमाम तवानाई को मुझे इस्तेमाल करना पड़ा ताकि मैं इनकी रफ्तार का साथ दे सकूं। मुझे बेहद खुशी है कि जैसा कि अभी आमिर साहब ने कहा कि हैंगटन किताब जो है क्लैश ऑफ सिविलाइजेशन पर बहुत सारी बातें हुई हैं। हम कॉन्सिलियंस जो है सिविलाइजेशन का, हम उस पर बात कर रहे हैं, जिसने हमें हमारे सामने उम्मीदों के बहुत सारे चिराग भी रोशन किए हैं। मैं अपने तमाम मेहमानान गिरामी का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ, और ये भी इतना भी ताबो तवा नहीं है कि मेरा पेपर मेरे हाथ में है और मैंने इम्तियाज़ साहब से कहा कि मैं विड्रा करता हूँ, इंशाल्लाह मैं इसको अकेले पढ़ के जो है खुश हो लूँगा, और मैं नहीं चाहता हूँ कि अब मज़ीद कोई बोझ हमारे मेहमानों पर पड़े। आप सबका बेहद शुक्रिया, और आप सब की का साथ जो है वो वही इस कॉन्फ्रेंस की कामयाबी और इसके समरबार होने की ज़मानत रही है। मैं एक बार फिर अपने तमाम साथियों का, DSW के साथियों का, अपनी चारों ज़बानों के जो हमारे सुदूर हैं, अरबी की नुमाइंदगी तो मैं बजाते खुद कर रहा हूँ, उर्दू, पर्शियन और हिंदी जो है शोबे के सुदूर का, उनके टीचर्स का और उनके DSW के हमारे तमाम साथियों का, और स्पेशली जो है कल्चरल एक्टिविटीज़ सेंटर के भी हमारे तमाम साथियों का, और हमारी यूनिवर्सिटी के असातिज़ा का, यूनिवर्सिटी के ज़िम्मेदारों का बेहद दिल की गहराइयों से शुक्रिया कि अगर उनका कंटिन्यूअस सपोर्ट, ताउन मुतवासिल और मुसलसल जो है वो हमें नहीं मिला होता तो हमारे लिए इस ख्वाब को शर्मिंदे ताबीर करना बिल्कुल मुमकिन नहीं था। मैं आप तमामी हजरात का, अपने मेहमानों का, और सबसे पहले तो फिरोज साहब का शुक्रिया कि जो एक बेहद अहम पॉइंट मैं छोड़ रहा था उसको याद कराया। IMC जो है हमारा जो इंस्ट्रक्शनल मीडिया सेंटर है, उनका ताउन भी तकरीबन जितनी बातें मैं जिक्र कर चुका हूं उन तमाम के मजमूए के बराबर उनका भी ताउन था कि हमने हैदराबाद में ये कॉन्फ्रेंस किया, उन्होंने इस कॉन्फ्रेंस को आलमी बना दिया। इसके लिए डायरेक्टर रिजवान साहब का और उनके तमाम साथियों का जो यहाँ मेरे सामने हैं, उन सब का शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ। मैं सिर्फ इस डेर से नाम नहीं लेना चाहता हूँ कि कहीं कोई नाम छूट ना जाए तो शिकायत का मौका हो जाए। तमाम साथियों का दिल की गहराई से बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, और मुझे उम्मीद है कि मौलाना आज़ाद नेशनल उर्दू यूनिवर्सिटी ने जो पेशकदमी की है ये मुस्तकबिल में भी जारी व सारी रहेगी। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, और इसी के साथ मैं इस 2 रोज़ा इल्मी कॉन्फ्रेंस के इख्तिताम का ऐलान करता हूँ। वाइस चांसलर के बिहाफ पर फिर आप किसी का नाम मुझसे ले रहे ताकि छूटे हुए नामों की शिकायत जो है बरकरार रहे। मैं आपसे सभी का, एक एक फर्द बशर का जिन्होंने इसमें ताउन किया है, समझे। और हम तो एक ऐसी कौम है कि जो सवाब पर भी भरोसा करते हैं, नाम गिनवाने के अलावा एक बेहद इल्मी काम था। और बहुत सारी ऐसी चीज़ें हमारे तलबा को, ऐसी बातें सुनने को मिली कि इस कॉन्फ्रेंस के बगैर वो बातें हमारे तलबा तक नहीं पहुंच सकती थी। बड़ी ही आलिमाना और फाजिलाना बातें थी। मैं बहुत बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ, और इसी के साथ ये कॉन्फ्रेंस का इख्तिताम का ऐलान किया जा रहा है। शुक्रिया।
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Your presence and every little contribution has enriched this conference, and we look forward to meeting you all again and again at MANUU.